You're listening to the Whole Hog Football Podcast, sponsored by Kendall King, bringing you the latest news, position analysis, and more. Here's your hosts, Matt Jones with Andrew Joseph and Scotty Bordelon.
Arkansas with two straight tough losses at home. They've got a big challenge this week with Ole Miss coming to Razorback Stadium. It'll be a 6:30 kickoff on SEC Network. The Razorbacks coming off a 13-10 loss to LSU, a game that they had many chances to win, just couldn't get a lot going offensively. And we'll see what happens this week with KJ Jefferson. Did not play against LSU, and certainly that affected the Razorbacks offensively. Matt Jones with Scotty Bordelon and Andrew Joseph of WholeHogSports.com. And it's kind of a similar situation, I think, when you look at the LSU game as the Liberty game of the week before. With the way Arkansas's defense has played throughout the season and the numbers that LSU had put up offensively over the last few weeks, I think if you would have told anybody that Arkansas would hold LSU to 13 points, most people would say, yeah, they're going to win that game. But offensively, they just couldn't get anything going without KJ Jefferson. And this is two times now this year, the Mississippi State game being the first, LSU obviously being the second, that it is just clear as day that Jefferson is the clear-cut MVP of this team. And as he goes, Arkansas goes. But when he's not in the lineup, it sure seems like it's a tough sledding for the Razorbacks.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt. He's the guy that makes everything go, and he's such a threat to run. That defenses have to. He's a big threat to run, but KJ's throughout his Arkansas career has been a really, I think, efficient passer, and a lot of that has to do with a lot of the quick throws, intermediate throws that he makes, check downs and the like. But just that threat alone tends to pull defenders out of the box, and it opens up Arkansas's run game. So his impact is really just infinite. I mean, and Sam Pittman was talking about it earlier this week that defenses can load the box when you got your backup quarterback in there who they're not afraid of in the passing game. And you mentioned that Mississippi State game. Like, Arkansas had a little bit of life offensively in that game. I know they put up a bunch of yards, and kind of the tail of that game too was some short yardage runs that you didn't get the line to gain, or you couldn't punch it into the end zone when you needed to. But yeah, it was Arkansas's offense was just kind of a wreck last week. And I think on their first 8 possessions, 6 times they either punted or turned the ball over on downs. And I think there was a fumble mixed in there. And then there was, one scoring drive that just resulted in a field goal. Like, at this point of the year, when the weather's getting cold and it's a little bit tougher to throw the football effectively, I think your short yardage run game and your offensive line and your run game as a whole has got to be really clicking. And I don't know that we'll see Arkansas's offense click the way that it did earlier in the year unless KJ's in there. It sounds like, Tuesday he was back at practice to the front of the line. And so maybe that's an indicator that, he's gearing up to go this weekend. I think they've got a good shot against Ole Miss. But I think how good of a shot Arkansas's got to get bowl eligible and knock off a top 15 team. It largely depends on his availability, and not just his availability, not just him being out there, but just him being able to provide quality snaps and get that passing game generated a little bit quicker than it has in weeks past. And like I mentioned earlier, key part to the run game too. He really opens everything up offensively.
Well, he wants to play in this game with it being Ole Miss. We saw how much that playing Ole Miss meant to him last year whenever he went down to Oxford. And I think that was the best game of his career. I know that he had 5 touchdowns against BYU, but I'm just talking about all around. I think he had over 400 yards of total offense last year at Ole Miss, had 3 rushing touchdowns, 3 passing touchdowns. And, so that this is a game that really means a lot to him. And if he's physically able to play, he's going to want to play in it. And I think he probably also sees, like we were talking about, the value that he has to this football team, that, these last 2 weeks haven't gone the way that people probably thought they were going to go. We certainly all thought they were going to beat Liberty. I think we thought LSU was going to be a much tougher game. Uh, but I think Arkansas's got a chance to beat Ole Miss this week. I think Ole Miss is really good. I think they're going to challenge Arkansas's defense, and I want to talk more about the defensive improvement that Arkansas's made in just a minute. But you just got to feel like if KJ Jefferson is physically able to play, he's going to do it. And from all indications, it's not a necessarily a physical problem with him. It's more of how much pain tolerance or what's the pain tolerance that he can stand. I think that's probably why he missed the LSU game as much as anything.
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind this game means a lot to him, and it's probably a big motivator for him, obviously, with it being a team from his home state. Um, and he missed the Mississippi State game, another team from his home state, missed that one. And he just doesn't like to see Arkansas lose. Like it's just pretty cut and dry there. Like he's a really competitive guy, but he also knows, if he can't stand the pain that he's in, then he's gonna do what's in his best interest and maybe Arkansas's best interest too, and just maybe turn it over to the backup and see what they can do. We talked to Dalton Wagner last night and asked him about, kind of what last weekend was like for him, not being able to play because of back trouble. And he was just like, I knew that if I went out there and tried to play, I wouldn't have given, our offensive line and our offense the best, chance to succeed. And I think KJ's kind of the same way, but he really wants to play in this game. I remember talking to his mom last year, and I think Ole Miss sits a little bit differently with KJ than maybe Mississippi State, because Ole Miss wanted to recruit KJ as a receiver or, to play another position on offense, and he just really wasn't about that. And so I think just seeing the Ole Miss logo, seeing the guys on the other side, I think he really wants this game. And I don't know if this is maybe too dramatic, but I think a lot of people have been frustrated with kind of his availability, and they're kind of questioning, his toughness and his want to win and his will to win and that kind of thing. So if he goes out and plays and he plays well, it could have a big impact on his legacy here. I think, last season's game against Ole Miss, really vaulted him into that conversation of, quarterbacks in the league that, really, really explosive, can lead a team offensively and lead a team in general. This year, he's definitely had those moments, where the last few weeks have been kind of hairy just with his availability and the injury that he's dealing with. But I definitely think that he wants to play in this game, and he wants to help Arkansas, find all the success it can and getting back bowl eligible again. For a quarterback, I think it's big for a quarterback to be able to maybe look back years down the line and be able to say, the program that I played in, didn't have great success in the regular season and didn't, maybe make it to the postseason. But when I was there, we were able to get to a bowl game in consecutive years. I think that's a big deal. I think he definitely wants that to be remembered.
I think Sam Pittman mentioned earlier in the week that KJ feels better than he had previously the past 2 weeks, which would lead me to believe he's at least probably going to play. Otherwise, if you're saying he's feeling better than he was again at the time of the Liberty game when he did play, then and he doesn't play when you're saying he feels better than that against Ole Miss, that would kind of lead me to believe that he probably shouldn't have played against Liberty. But I think regardless of whoever's the quarterback against Ole Miss, the O-line has got to improve. I think the last 2 weeks they've kind of really let themselves down, to be honest. I think they probably want to be playing better than they have. They've struggled to get the run game going in both games. They struggled to protect the quarterback. And I think no matter who it is, if it's a banged up KJ Jefferson, you're going to want to be able to protect the quarterback, and you're going to want to be able to keep him upright. And then if it's a backup quarterback, you're going to want to make them feel comfortable in the pocket, and you've got to get that run game going, because that's Arkansas's bread and butter, and that's how they've been winning all years, through that run game, creating passing opportunities through play action, and the run game just hasn't been there And I think that's largely just because of the push the O-line has not been getting.
Just listening to Sam Pittman talk throughout the week, Andrew mentioned, Jefferson playing hurt against Liberty. I think that they learned a lesson from that game, which was that he had not practiced much leading up to the Liberty game. And so I think it taught them going into LSU that, hey, he hasn't practiced a whole lot this week either. It's better for the team to have someone in there who's gone through practice, who's gone through the reps. And, it's tough to take a player who's been injured and just kind of insert them on game day and expect for everything to run smoothly. But man, speaking of Jefferson not being in there, the problems with the backup quarterback at Arkansas, and this isn't just an Arkansas problem. It's hard to keep a quality backup in your program, especially now that you can transfer and not have to sit out anywhere. But wow, I mean, Malik Hornsby just uh, so inconsistent. I feel like in his play, you think about how great he was when he first came in against Mississippi State, and then all of a sudden, kind of the bottom fell out, and then he was never able to get going against LSU. And Cade Fortin provided them a little bit of stability, uh, gave them their touchdown drive, but you lack confidence. I feel like offensively, if either of those guys are in the game over Jefferson, and just the stark contrast between the way a starter can lead this offense and what you have in your number 2 and number 3 quarterbacks, I think is really alarming.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you there. And Matt, me and you were sitting next to each other during the LSU game when Malik took the field, and it's an interesting situation because Malik can make something out of nothing, like few guys can, like few backup quarterbacks can. He drops back to pass on like a hypothetically, like he drops back on a 3rd and 8 and he can't find anybody his first or second read. If he gets there, he can't find those guys, can't locate them and get them a pass in their direction. He's so cat quick and quick twitch that he can pull the ball down and run and pick up 11 or 12 yards and just keep the chains moving. But I think the issue is with less so with Cade Fortin based on what we saw after he came in the game last weekend. I just think there's an issue with sustaining drives, and not just sustaining drives, but like piling up, drives where you're eating up, several minutes off the clock. It's 7, 8, 9 play drives. I just don't think that he's there yet. Malik is. And I was looking at Pro Football Focus numbers after the LSU game. Malik had Arkansas's lowest offensive grade, and his passing grade was 28.0, which that's pretty alarming. I'm with you about just the development of the backup quarterback. And I think it was the kind of the right thought initially to, try to get one of your best athletes on either side of the ball at a skill position and try to get the ball in his hands and see what you can do there. But that, for whatever reason, that just never really worked. I think the way that they wanted it to. There was some success early in the year, with like quick throws, and then he would motion into the backfield, take a direct snap and pick up first down yardage. But I mean, there was never, again, like sustained success with that Hornsby package. And I think that kind of maybe set him back a little bit developmentally as a quarterback. But I honestly, I expected a little bit more from Malik last week in the start that he got. But again, it's tough to be a really good quarterback in this league, especially when you got guys like Harold Perkins breathing down your neck constantly, and your offensive line's having some issues. You're down your starting right tackle, who's been here since it feels like 2000 and brings a lot of experience, and you put in a guy that hasn't played just a great deal of snaps since he transferred in. It's a really complex deal, I think, with the backup quarterback spot. I do think that Fortin provides you a little bit more stability and game manager type qualities than Malik does. And so, I wouldn't be surprised, if KJ for whatever reason has to come out, maybe this weekend or later down the line. I would imagine Cade Fortin's probably going to be your answer there, just because he can complete those 8 to 12, 15-yard passes with a little bit greater consistency than Malik can.
Yeah, I would agree. I kind of expected more out of Malik against LSU, and I think with Malik, third year in the system. Obviously, he hasn't had a lot of playing opportunities, but he's been in practice for 3 years, learning the scheme for 3 years, learning the playbook for 3 years. I just kind of expected him to be a little bit more comfortable than he looked against LSU, and I think there's a lack of trust in him throwing the ball in himself and from the coaching staff. I think neither one of them really truly trust him to open up the offense through the air and pass the ball. And you think you could see that in the play calling, where he would. I mean, obviously they were going to go run heavy either way because he's such a dynamic athlete. But when they did call a passing play, it just seemed like Malik was waiting for someone to be wide open before he would let the ball go, and he just didn't trust himself to maybe let the ball go and let a receiver make a play instead of you don't need the pass didn't need to be perfect. Just give your guy a chance to go up and make a play. And I thought he just kind of waited around too long, and then eventually ended up scrambling or getting chased down, as you mentioned, by Harold Perkins. And it just Cade Fortin, I mean, he wasn't lighting the world on fire, but he was getting the ball out quickly and giving the receivers a chance to make a play. And I think that's what gave them their best chance to win.
I agree with you on the Hornsby passing deal. Like he's the where he is in terms of his growth as a passer is I think he needs his receivers to be really, really open, or at least have a good deal of separation. The thing is, like, to your point, Andrew, like Arkansas's receivers by and large have pretty solid catch radiuses. But the thing is, like Malik, his accuracy and his precision as a passer is just, it's just probably not where it needs to be, and that leads to trouble in the passing game when you can't fit balls into tight windows. You've got to do that in this league to be successful as a passer. I just don't think he's there.
With Hornsby and his passing, it's like he'll make two great throws, and then all of a sudden he'll make 4 or 5 that are just really head scratching. There was one on Saturday. I can't remember exactly where it was, but there was I don't know if it was a running back or a receiver, but was not too far from him, was open, and he throws the ball, and I mean it just died on him. I mean it just fell down at the receiver's feet, and I feel like there's a lot of those throws with him. The running game is not producing for Arkansas either, and I think that's partially why you had some of the struggles with the quarterback play the other day against LSU. It was the second straight game where the run game just really never materialized. Arkansas, for the second straight week, held to a season low total rushing yards. Same thing goes for Rocket Sanders. He was held to 46 yards on 12 carries. I know it's kind of harder to get the run game going in the cold. I feel like it's harder to do some of the the change of directions when you're cold. And I feel like cold weather, for whatever reason, benefits defenders more than it does offensive players, just because I think it's harder to make defenders miss when your body's cold. And you're going to see that again on Saturday night, by the way. You think it was cold for LSU. It's probably going to be the same temperature at kickoff, or right around the same temperature as it was for the LSU game on Saturday night. But the difference was, in the LSU game, the temperature was rising and you had the sun out as the game went along. On Saturday night, it's going to be falling, obviously, with it being dark. But the run game, it just feels like Arkansas's got to get that going. And maybe this is the week to do it. Teams have had a lot of success running against Ole Miss this year. Auburn ran for somewhere around 300 yards against them. They did limit Alabama's run game somewhat, but Alabama seems like they're going maybe more pass heavy in their offense as the year progresses. What do you think, Scotty, that they've got to do to get this run game going this week?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not 100% sure what the top priority is. There's several. I think it's, Sam on Monday was talking about how Ole Miss in their defensive front, or at least their front seven, when you throw in linebackers, maybe a nickel into that equation too. Like it's a pretty aggressive defense that I think has gotten more and more aggressive as the season has gone on. Like they were giving up, pretty good yardage. If you're an opponent, you were picking up pretty good yardage against Ole Miss on the ground, at least I think early in the season. But they're going to throw, a lot of those kind of, maybe unique is the right word, or exotic run blitzes at Arkansas, and Arkansas struggled with that. I think in the last few weeks, my football IQ is not not great. But I think that's been an issue for Arkansas in the last few games, and it's led to them, having back-to-back season lows in rushing yards, which I did not expect for Arkansas to do. This late in the season, you kind of think that your team is a little bit banged up, but later in the year you feel like you should be kind of in sync, I guess, with the games played and the successes you've had. You just kind of feel like that synergy would carry into the season. I think that's a big deal. Like Ole Miss, I know we're not talking about pass protection, but that just to tell you how aggressive they are. Like they're third in the conference in sacks, and Arkansas is first, and they're kind of nipping on Arkansas's heels in that category. I think too is a big deal, and Sam brought it up, I think maybe Monday or Saturday after the loss to LSU. At some point, Arkansas skill players have to make guys miss, and it's been kind of alarming to me that they haven't been able to do that with greater regularity. I think Rocket Sanders has tons and tons of pro potential, but maybe if there's a knock on him, it's that he doesn't have like that next level wiggle to him, where he can beat somebody, make them miss in a phone booth. I think that's a big deal. AJ Green, I think, has the speed to be able to do that. But again, you're talking about SEC defenders and linebackers that can run like a running back, and so it's pretty tough. I just think Arkansas at some point they've got to find that elusiveness trait that I know that they all have. But again, when your offensive line's not getting the greatest push, it's really, really tough to make somebody miss when they're like a foot or two in front of you, rather than maybe beating a guy at the second level when you got a little bit of space in front of you.
Rocket's not the type of running back to kind of go east to west, juke you out of your shoes. I think he's more of the type, kind of like, and not to compare him to Derrick Henry, but I think defenses as the game goes on, they get tired of tackling guys like that and bigger running backs, and then at that point, when you kind of tire them out, Rocket Sanders coming at you at 6'2", 230 pounds, you're not going to want to maybe bring him down as bad as he wants to stay up. And I think his elusiveness isn't much of a skill as much as it is his will to just not be tackled. I think that's kind of how he makes guys miss more than just juking them out. And I think Rashad Dubinion might be the most shifty back in the that running back room, but he's
I agree.
Essentially been phased out of the offense for the past few weeks. So it'll be interesting to see maybe if he gets some more touches there. But I do agree the receivers also should be a little bit more of dynamic of playmakers than I think they've been. I think they have the potential to be, and they've shown that they can be game-changing players, and I just haven't seen it to this point.
Yeah, and a big part of the run game too is the blocking from the receivers, and from a guy like Trey Knox. I know I can't imagine what it's like having to try to keep Harold Perkins out of your backfield. It's probably really terrifying if I had to guess. But you're going to see really, really talented edge defenders and linebackers and nickelbacks on a weekly basis. And Trey and the rest of those receivers, they've got to hold up their end of the bargain too. Like anytime that Arkansas's run game doesn't get going, like the first thing that everybody jumps to is the offensive line. Well, Ricky Stromberg was Arkansas's highest graded offensive player last week, and so it's the guys around them, and it's the ancillary pieces too, or the auxiliary pieces, like with the tight end, and then you bring Nathan Baxter into the game or Hudson Henry. Those guys have got to do their part, and then I know Keytron Jackson, Jaden Hazelwood, Matt Landers, they've all been kind of applauded this season at some point for their blocking on the perimeter. They've got to get back to maybe having a little bit of a nasty streak about them too.
Arkansas's run offense is really peculiar because they led the SEC for most of the year. They're second right now, but what you see from them, I think, is in short yardage situations. Whenever teams bring in their larger personnel, they're just having a really hard time getting them off the ball. Very interesting dynamic, because you've got the stats don't necessarily tell the story with the run game. The Whole Hog Football Podcast is sponsored by Kindle King, design, display, signage, KindleKing.com. That's KENDALKING.com.
The Kindle King Group family of companies plays to win, just like our hogs. We know how demanding retail marketing is today. From digital omnichannel creative services, through in-store signing and displays, and finally to social influence, we've got you covered. Our KKG Inc. family of companies, Kindle King, Shopcart Creative, and Soapbox Influence are winning with multiple retailers and brands. We play to win and will be a winning partner for all your retail marketing service needs. Go Hogs!
WholeHogSports.com has the largest, most experienced staff of reporters covering sports in Arkansas. Football, basketball, baseball, recruiting, and more. You'll find it at WholeHogSports.com. The website includes up-to-minute news, daily commentaries, and award-winning photography from the staffs of Hogs Illustrated and the Democrat Gazette. For subscriptions, call 1-800-757-6277. That's 1-800-757-6277. Or visit us online today. WholeHogSports.com.
Want more coverage of your home team? Download the Whole Hog Sports Video on Demand app. Check out the Fan Zone and get up-to-the-minute videos, podcasts, and features on football, basketball, baseball, recruiting, and more. Search for Whole Hog Sports on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire at home. And take it with you on the go by downloading it for your mobile device in your app store. The Whole Hog Sports Video on Demand app. Get it today.
Welcome back to the Whole Hog Football Podcast.
We mentioned earlier that Arkansas's defense is playing better, and if you dive into the numbers, they really back that up. Against Auburn a few weeks ago, the Razorbacks starters gave up 318 yards through about 4.5 quarters. They put their backups in for the final 7.5 minutes of that game, ended up giving up another 150 yards on 275-yard possessions against Auburn. But just talking about starting defensive players, gave up 318 yards that game, gave up 291 to Liberty, gave up 284 to LSU. I think that in today's game, if you can give up anywhere below 300, that's a great defensive game. Anything below, say, 330, that's a pretty good defensive game. And so this is 3 straight games now where Arkansas's, again, their starters have played what I consider to be really good to great defense. I thought that it was easily the best defense that we've seen out of them all season against LSU. You can talk about the cold, and I think that probably had something to do with it. But the fact is that they slowed down an LSU offense that Florida couldn't stop, Ole Miss couldn't stop, Alabama couldn't stop. And I think it's really, I don't know what the word is, encouraging maybe for the Razorbacks that their defense is really coming along here at the end of the year. You've heard Sam Pittman talk about this a little bit this week, that they're finally getting players in the right spots. The players are becoming comfortable with who they're playing around. I think the move of Hudson Clark to safety was huge. I think Quincy McAdoo, the way that he's played, becoming an emerging player at cornerback, that's been really key for this defense. I think Chris Paul getting more snaps at linebacker has been really key. And the fact that the defense has been playing so well, I think gives you some encouragement that Arkansas is going to be in a position to win these next 2 games. Now they've just got to have the offense to back up this really solid defensive play.
Yeah, I'm not sure after the BYU game, whether Arkansas was going to be able to, generate enough stops in games to turn the ball over to the offense, which at the time was clicking. And, we just figured Arkansas's offense was going to have to outscore, the opponent they were just going to have to match score for score and just hope that the defense, came up with at least 1 3-and-out or 1 takeaway, just basically steal a possession in a game. But in all honesty, like, you look at the totality of Arkansas's schedule, it's the offense that's kind of cost Arkansas 3 games this year. It's not the defense. And they've given up 1 touchdown in the last 6 quarters, which is phenomenal. And I asked Sam on Monday, I was like, how much confidence does your defense take away from what you've done the last, 6 quarters, game and a half, whatever? And he said, it's a lot about matchups. And I think Arkansas matched up pretty well, across the board with both Liberty and LSU, which is crazy. You can match up with with both of those teams pretty well. but they did what they had to do to give Arkansas a chance to win. They're playing winning defense, and it's almost like, if Arkansas can find any harmony on offense, like Arkansas would be playing really, really complimentary football right now, because special teams it's been not a sight for sore eyes, I don't think. Whenever it's been on the field, they've actually been pretty productive there. So it's just kind of about the offense getting it together. The defense has been really good, lead the conference in sacks. Drew Sanders, I think, is kind of getting back to what he was maybe in the first 5 or 6 weeks of the season after a lull. And you mentioned Quincy McAdoo and Chris Paul. I think those have been two phenomenal additions to, get snaps, and quality snaps too. Like Chris Paul was playing, I don't know if sparingly was the right word early in the year, but his role has really grown, and you can kind of see pretty clearly the trust that the defensive staff, Michael Scherer, Barry Odom, have in him as a redshirt freshman, because Bumper Pools most of the time on third down, he's coming off the field. And you think about that, he's one of your tackle leaders. He's not even on the field on third down, but they trust Chris Paul enough to go get it done. And, he came up with a pretty big sack last week against LSU. Quincy McAdoo broke up 2 passes the week after he graded out over 90 against Liberty, according to PFF. So those are some really, really intriguing, exciting young pieces that they've just kind of thrown in there with some pretty veteran guys, I think. And it's made a world of difference. I think the weather definitely made an impact last week, and I would imagine it will this week. Wouldn't be surprising if Arkansas, I don't know if replicates what they did last week again on Saturday. But Ole Miss has had some trouble throwing the ball. I think their completion percentage from their quarterbacks is below 60%. I think they've thrown 8 picks, and so their touchdown to interception ratio is roughly 2-1. So there's some opportunities there for Arkansas to take advantage. I just think pressuring Jackson Dart is going to be a really big deal. And I think Arkansas to this point in the season has shown that they can get pressure on the quarterback from, a number of different areas of the field. Like I mentioned, the linebacker spot with Drew and Chris Paul, and the defensive line is coming through. Zach Williams, I think, made some big plays last week. Latavius Brini, if they get Miles Slusher back, he, before he got suspended, he had a sack in back-to-back games. That's super valuable too, for a guy that you wouldn't necessarily consider a pass rusher. So a lot of good things have happened in the last 2 weeks. You just want to see it continue this week too.
There is some thought that the teams that can run the ball are the ones who are able to play the best in November. Arkansas and Ole Miss, as we mentioned, are 1 and 2 in the SEC in rushing offense. Defensively, they're very similar as well. They're both middle of the pack defensively in stopping the run. Arkansas allowing 146 rushing yards a game, Ole Miss averaging 151. Of course, they have had some bigger games here of late as they played more SEC teams. We mentioned the Auburn game the week before Auburn played Arkansas back in October. I want to go back to one thing about defensive, though. Doesn't it seem like Barry Odom has really proven himself here over the past month or so of this season? Everybody's saying, oh, he's lost it. Look at this, look at that. I think it just took a while for them with all the injuries they had at the back end in the secondary to figure out what they were getting defensively and to put all these different pieces together. And like we mentioned, it's taken some kind of creative moves, moving a Hudson Clark away from a position where, again, people have their opinion about Hudson Clark, but statistically, he was Arkansas's top rated pass defense player for at least a decent part of this season. Then you get Quincy McAdoo coming over from the offense and saying, hey, I can play defense if needed. And that's certainly been a big deal for them. But it just seems like Barry Odom has really proven himself here over these last few weeks, and maybe even redeemed himself a little bit from all the criticism that he was getting earlier in the year.
Yeah, I think he's done a commendable job, especially with all the injuries, as you mentioned. And, you make those changes, and I think you're just never going to make everyone happy. Like, he makes those changes and the defense plays better. And then all of a sudden it's not, wow, good decision. It's now, why didn't you make that decision earlier? And I think you're just never going to be able to please everyone. But I think with the situation, the cards that he was dealt early on, that he's done a good job with the Razorback defense. And I think Bumper Pool said yesterday, this defense is at its best when they're being aggressive. And early on in the season, it just didn't feel like they could afford to be aggressive and send an extra blitzer because the secondary just couldn't cover a light pole. Like, I mean, if you sent an extra body, they needed as many bodies in coverage as possible. If you sent anyone after the quarterback and they didn't get there, then that secondary was getting torched. And they've really turned it around with the emergence of Quincy McAdoo, as you said, and the move to Hudson Clark to free safety, I think has really allowed them to send more guys after the quarterback and more guys in the box to stop the run. And I know it's completely hypothetical, but I mean, just imagine this defense without the injuries and even the preseason injuries to Jalen Catalon and Torian Carter, and that's a scary sight.
I just feel like being a defensive coordinator, it's just totally thankless. I mean, because you can have a really solid defense, but you're never going to be able to completely shut teams down. The offenses are so good now. The rules are so geared toward offense. It makes playing defense hard. You think even about an Alabama, they've got a pretty good defense this year. I think at one point they had given up 12 touchdowns all season, and 7 of them came in one game against Tennessee. There's always going to be these lapses defensively.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Like offenses these days and modern college football are really, really good, man. I think the move with Hudson Clark to safety was really, I don't want to say genius, but it was absolutely the correct move, because if you look at Arkansas's right now, if you look at like their top 4 or 5 guys in terms of overall defense grade, number 1 is Quincy McAdoo, which is really, really impressive for a true freshman. I think he's really showing his potential. I think he's a potential star at the cornerback spot. Second is Hudson Clark, and so that tells you right there that he's in a place right now where he can utilize the positive traits that he has. And then, you look at number 5, it's Dwight McGlothern, your other cornerback. So I think it's always really good to have, 3 of your top 5 defensive players, just on the field at the same time, especially in a secondary that, was, to put it lightly, they were really going through it earlier in the year. But I think that move to safety for Hudson Clark opened the door for, a really talented kid to come in and just, really take over that role at cornerback, because Malik Chavis had gotten a chance, and I think maybe Keywan Parker got some snaps over there too. Arkansas was really searching for an answer at corner. Quincy McAdoo is that guy now, and so you feel really secure with both of your corners. Hudson Clark at middle safety, and Simeon Blair is going to give you what Simeon Blair does, but he's the captain of that secondary. He's going to get everybody in the position. So you feel really, really good about at least 4 of those 5 spots. You get Miles Slusher back, you're looking pretty good.
Feels like 4th down is going to be something to watch closely this week. Of course, Ole Miss under Lane Kiffin has kind of made a name for itself as being the team that goes for it on 4th down a lot. They led college football in 4th down attempts last year. I know they're real high up on the list this year. I don't know if they're number 1, but Arkansas is going for it on 4th down a lot more this year than it did last year. Last year in 13 games, the Razorbacks went for it on 4th 19 times. This year through 10 games, they have gone for it on 4th down 20 times. I think the Liberty game skews that stat a little bit because they had 6 4th down attempts against Liberty. A lot of them were out of necessity later in the game when they were down, and they had to go for it on 4th down to be able to give themselves a chance to win. But of course, you had the 2 4th down conversion attempts against LSU that were really scrutinized after the game. Obviously, you've got the 4th and goal early in the game where they choose to go for it and they get stopped. A field goal obviously would have been very big there late in the game. And then also I thought maybe the more head scratching decision was to go for it on 4th down from the LSU 48 midway through the 3rd quarter. It's a defensive struggle at that point. It's a field position game. Your defense is playing well. And when they didn't make that 4th down, they give LSU a short field, and that's LSU's only touchdown of the game. They go 40 yards in 5 plays and score there. And that was really, I thought, the turning point in that game. It seems to me like, and Scotty, you and I have talked about this a lot. We've both written about it, but that Sam Pittman talks about the Auburn, or in the offseason, he would talk about last year's Auburn game and how it taught him not to press. He said that he felt in that game whether it be attempted a long field goal, going for it and fourth down in the middle of the field. He just thought he pressed too much, and it allowed Auburn to be able to do some things that were easier than if he wouldn't have pressed. It just seems to me like maybe Arkansas is pressing a little bit more these last 2 weeks, and maybe he's kind of moved away from that philosophy of don't press all the time. I thought that with a different decision there on fourth down in the middle of the field, maybe that game goes completely different on Saturday.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I know, like you mentioned, we've talked about that several times. Just as Arkansas is walking out onto the field to go for some of these fourth downs, I think it's more than anything. It's just, I think it's actually, I think it's kind of two things. It's forecasting what you think your offense, what you feel like your offense is up to that day. Because points were obviously at a premium last week. A touchdown at that point, or even a first down to move the chains, in the red zone would have made a big difference in that game. And secondly, I think that Sam is like, he may be pressing a little bit just because he knows he's not going to have KJ that day, or, if he does have KJ, not at 100%, maybe you gotta take your chances, when he's out there. I don't know. It's just it's an interesting deal to watch because he made such a big deal, like you mentioned, especially at the HI Sports Club. He hinted at that Auburn game several times, and then he finally got around to talking about, it taught him a big lesson as a coach. But I think, again, like I'll go back and make a basketball reference. Like Eric Musselman says that every game takes on its own identity and takes its own shape and stuff. And I think it's, going for it on fourth down, I just think you got to take a lot of things into consideration. Like, how well is your defense playing? Who do we have on the offensive side of the ball that can, is our offense today in shape to, maybe put together scoring drives? Like, how have our drives previously in the game gone? Like, if we been able to sustain drives? I just think he's doing a lot of forecasting with those fourth down decisions, just because he can, who knows better than the head coach, what the kind of the general mood or the general feel is for his offense. It's pretty interesting. But yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with the fourth down deal this weekend. I actually just wrote that key for our keys column that's going to come out later in the week. Ole Miss has not been going for it on fourth down as much this year. I think they led the country in fourth down attempts last year and were tied with Air Force for fourth down conversions. They've only gone for it 21 times this year on fourth down, and their success rate is, under 50%. So I think Arkansas's defense has to be up for a bunch of fourth down challenges, I would imagine, again, because, the weather's cool. Points are probably going to be at a premium this weekend, and Lane Kiffin's going to be looking for any kind of an edge he can get offensively.
I will say this about Arkansas, the fourth down that they had early in the game. I understand it a little bit. It was 4th and goal from the 3-yard line. And people kind of look at the game from kind of a post-game lens, but if you put yourself in that moment, they had just had a 47-yard drive where they settled for a field goal. They had a 7-yard run on first down there after they had recovered the fumble at the 10-yard line. And so at that point, they're averaging somewhere around 3.5 to 4 yards per play. They didn't know it was going to be such a defensive struggle, I think, for the rest of the game. And so I understand that one a little bit more than I understood the one in the third quarter, where there's, you've kind of established this pattern that your offense isn't moving the ball, your quarterback's playing really shaky. And that defense by LSU, probably the best tackling team that we've seen Arkansas play to this point in the season. So I understood the one in the first quarter a little bit more than I understood the one in the third quarter. Obviously, the one in the first quarter has been really scrutinized because you get a field goal there, you potentially have a game in overtime, and who knows how that goes. But Arkansas loses it to LSU 13-10. Ole Miss this weekend at 6:30. Hope you'll come to our website, wholehogsports.com, before the game to get you ready for the Razorbacks game against Ole Miss. We've also got we're in full gear with basketball coverage right now. Plenty of basketball content there as the Razorbacks finish up their first little slate of home games and get ready for the Maui Invitational next week. Later this week, we'll have another episode of the Basketball Podcast of Mid-America. We'll look back at Arkansas's game against North Dakota State and Fordham. For Andrew Joseph and Scotty Bordelon, I'm Matt Jones. We appreciate you joining us, and we'll see you next time on the Whole Hog Football Podcast.
The proceeding has been a production of WholeHogSports.com. Look for our latest podcasts on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast store. And visit us anytime at WholeHogSports.com for the latest news and commentary.